My friends, in this video we will have some real human stories from both sides, from Russian side and from Ukrainian side. You get a frontline updates video tomorrow, but in this one I want to bring you something real. But before we get to those real human stories, it's time for the purge show in the Russian army. Here are today's list of Wagner commanders who are sleeping with the fishes or who have been purged by Putin. My friends, will zoom into Donetsk, and here's a settlement in Krasnokharivka. Ukrainians counterattacked from this settlement. As you can see, the yellow area here is liberated territory, and Ukrainians sent another Wagner commander to sleep with the fishes. The assaulting Ukrainian unit was the 79th Brigade, and the Wagner commander sent to sleep with the fishes was Misha Luchin, or Donbas Micha. That was his nickname. He had about 22,000 followers on Twitter and Telegram, and he was a UAV unit commander, so a very high value target. A Russian UAV unit commander might, for example, control Lancer drones, which are one of the most effective Russian FPV drones against the Ukrainian armor. So taking out these commanders, a very huge blow for the Russians, because training those commanders takes a lot of time, and Lancer drones are a scarce commodity in the Russian army. Russia opened a criminal case against the colonel of GRU, Vladimir Kvachkov. He was an ally of terrorist Igor Kirkin and a member of his Angry Patriots Club, as they call it. And the accusation against him from the Ministry of Defense was discrediting the Russian armed forces. Now, he was very anti-Western, he was pro-Soviet, and he was very vocal about it. He performed as a Putin supporter, but in the recent days, especially when the war started, he was very vocal about the mistakes of the Russian Ministry of Defense, like Kirkin's Angry Patriot Club is known for. He was also a very experienced military commander and a Spetsnaz theorist. People like this are very important for the Russian war effort, because Putin is purging intelligentsia like Stalin did. I mean, this here is part of that intelligentsia. If you are a theorist of anything in the army, you work with your brains. Spetsnaz theory especially is very necessary, because Russian army is known to throw their Spetsnaz forces, very valuable forces, and VDV, the Desantnik forces, as infantry. This is basically throwing them away, or to illustrate it, it's like using a hammer to do a very precise clocksmith's job. It's the wrong tool for the wrong purpose. And now I'm only reading you the biggest purges and the biggest eliminations of the Russian commanders. There are more daily. Russia is losing commanders at a pace much faster than they can replace them. They actually cannot replace them, because making commanders like this, a colonel for example, it takes a decade and more. You cannot make those in 2 months in army school. Now, my friends, I will read you a statement from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, and it's connected with the Black Sea security. It's pretty bold. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine warns that from midnight, July 21st, 2023, all vessels heading through the waters of the Black Sea in the direction of seaports of the Russian Federation and Ukrainian seaports located on the territory of Ukraine that is temporarily occupied by Russia may be considered by Ukraine as carrying military cargo with all the associated risks. If we look at the situation from the military map, you can see that basically all of this area, what the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense means here is that every maritime traffic going on between occupied Ukrainian ports and ports from occupied Crimea or mainland Russia, this area right here, every vessel, because the grain deal ended, will be considered as a military vessel. So if Russia doesn't want to lose their ships, they better stay out of this water body right here, or they better get back into grain deal. Ukrainians sink the Moskva, the Black Sea Fleet top heavy cruiser. So Ukrainians have the capability to sink Russian ships no matter how big they are. So we might be expecting another Moskva incident in this water body. But it doesn't end there. Let's read further. In addition, navigation in the area of the northeastern part of the Black Sea and the Kerch Yenikal Strait of Ukraine is prohibited as dangerous. The grain deal ended on 17th of July. 2 days later, Russia attacked Odessa ports with missiles, and these missiles hit port facilities filled with grain. Ukraine reported that about 60,000 tons of grain were destroyed in that one attack. I mean, Russia was in a grain deal. They perfectly knew where this grain was located. It was a deliberate destruction of food. And part of this food was supposed to go to countries in northern Africa through the Turkish Strait. These countries have famine actively going on. Millions of people starving. My friends, we now have the final numbers of how many people went through Wagner PMC in their time in Ukraine. The overall numbers. This information comes from a representative of Wagner PMC, one of their commanders. Overall, all of the mercenaries that passed through Wagner PMC at the time of special military operation is 78,000. That is a lot more than I would have thought. 78, almost 100,000 personnel. But this also encompasses the prisoners recruited from Russian prison systems. 49,000 of those actually were prisoners, so most of them, the bulk of them. And what they promised the prisoners was amnesia, or you will get free if you survive for 6 months. But the goal was never to survive those troops, but to use those troops to lure out the Ukrainian machine gun nests and artillery positions. And unfortunately, this tactic worked very well until they had the prisoners. I mean, they died really fast, and that was the issue for Wagner. They needed to recruit more and more, and finally prisoners didn't want to join anymore because they saw through the rouge. Altogether, 22,000 mercenaries were killed out of 79,000 who went through the war zone. So about third were KIA, and 40,000 were wounded. So that of course tells us that the wounded translated back into Wagner PMC, meaning they have probably better medicine than the Russian armed forces. And about 25,000 are left alive, out of which about 10,000 have already went to Belarus. And we learned from Lithuanian intelligence that out of those 10,000 who went to Belarus, most of their weapons were taken from them, armor, anti-air capabilities, everything was taken except for the sidearms. So they are in Belarus, the camps are being built for them, but they don't have weapons. So they don't have any capacity to strike Ukraine from the north, and they don't have any capacity to change Lukashenko's regime, which Lukashenko was really afraid of. I mean, 10,000 battle-hardened Wagner mercenaries coming to his country fully armed with armor. I mean, this is a power change wanting to happen. So of course he did not let them in with weapons. Alright, my friends, now the first personal, real human story from Russia that illustrates perfectly where Russia is headed, and it's straight back to Stalin era terror. You're gonna love this story. It's a real story. In Moscow, there's a guy, 43-year-old Vitaly and K. We don't know his last name. It starts with a K. He failed a complaint to the police about his own sister. His sister's name was Oksana, and he did it because of political differences. He saw his sister reading Ukrainian news and being in Ukrainian media space. So getting information that no Russian person is supposed to get, because they're supposed to eat propaganda and she wasn't, and immediately her brother noticed it. The brother, was worried that his sister was under the influence of the Ukrainian armed forces and recruited by the Ukrainian intelligence forces. So if you read Ukrainian news in Russia, you're immediately recruited as a spy. That's the reality. The brother said that in order to scare his sister, he went to the police and filed a report. The police came to her home and actually filed a report or made a warning to her, and also he took away her computer, phone, tablet, everything. So he basically controls her, doesn't allow her to use internet, and this is all out of love, out of caring for his sister. Because he doesn't want her to fall into the trap of Ukrainian intelligence services. He doesn't want Budanov to get her, you know, the guy who never smiles. And these stories are very well known in Estonia from the 50s and 40s. Mostly when Soviet occupation began in the early 40s, Stalin died in 53. All of those 13 years before Khrushchev, these stories are very well known. The age of terror and fear and paranoia, and everybody and anybody could go to Gulag or Siberia for anything. Everybody was a spy. In this video we will see a soldier from the Ukrainian front lines taking his exam online. He's talking about the creation of first states, and I would just want to watch this video to give you an idea that you can actually live and go on with your life when the war is over. And this guy is obviously getting ready for it. He's making his exams, preparing for rebuilding Ukraine and rebuilding his life. I find this very motivating and amazing, actually. At the end of the 4th and beginning of the 3rd millennium in Egypt and on the banks of the Nile. Then it appeared in India, in China, in the 4th and 6th millennia. You can see the guy listening to him. He's obviously somewhere in a trench taking his exam. I'm sure he will pass. I mean, he's fighting for Ukraine. It would be so weird that he does the exam. He studied in the trenches, bombs were flying. He does the exam and the guy's like, no, there are a few points missing, you cannot get through. He will get through, he will get his degree, and when the war is over, he will get back his life. I'm so glad to see this. This is very inspiring. My friends, in this video, we will see Russian Tunguska anti-air systems. These are Soviet-made systems, and they look like German Gepard systems, and they work in a similar fashion, only they're a lot less capable. But to show you how bad is the situation with the Russian armor and vehicles at all equipment, this video illustrates it perfectly. Most of the Russian equipment was conserved, meaning put in warehouses covered with oil, sometimes not covered with oil, that's why we see them rusty. But the thing is, every vehicle, even in the Soviet parts, has rubber and plastic parts in it. It's just that's what you need to do. You cannot make our full metal. And these parts in 30 years, doesn't matter if you oil them or not, they will get brittle, they will break, and some functions of the vehicle don't work. For example, turret system of the BTR. It relies on rubber and plastic and wiring that has plastic harnesses around it, and if these go brittle and they make shortages, the turret system, which is electric, does not work. So you can say, however capable the Soviet tech is, however reliable, in 30 to 40 years it is still broken. It's just a matter of time and how rubber reacts to time. Let's watch this one. This is our battery, all 6 vehicles Tunguska, from which none is currently combat capable. With certain repairs, these 3 vehicles could be restored. Repairs obviously take time. And if you look at these vehicles, you don't see any rust. They look conserved, the barrels are covered. They look nice, they look like you can take them to war, but inside they're rots and they're broken. I mean, there is a lot of wiring in these vehicles. Very primitive vehicles, but still, they do rely on electricity, which needs to work if the wiring harnesses go bad with time or they burn through with heat inside the engine. You're gonna have to replace the entire thing. Guys from Ulyanovsk are saying it will take between a month and a half, a year. This is what we've received. This is the officials, the package from the Ministry of Defense. Like, take, you now have anti-air capabilities. But no, they don't, because they cannot do anything with them. In fact, 5 of Tunguskas, except the bright one, which is a corpse that can't be started because it may catch fire. All these vehicles had major repairs last year. All cars went through major service from FEB. November of last year. So these are already repaired vehicles. These are the better looking, better working vehicles. You don't want to see the ones that are rusted out. As a result, we got 5 vehicles with various degrees of malfunction. As a result, not a single vehicle is combat capable at the moment. These are the vehicles that the Ministry of Defense is giving us. Also, like 6-7 months ago, I remember reporting that the Russian Ministry of Defense sent hundreds of BTRs to the front. They took them out of warehouses and conversation and areas that they were held for decades, parking lots, literally on the rain for decades. This is how Russia is keeping their equipment. And they sent BTRs that in fact work. Well, they only checked the engine, they started them. If they started, it works. But when they got to the front lines, they started reporting that, oh, the turret doesn't move. Sorry, they were T-72s. What good is a T-72 when the turret doesn't move? You have to aim the entire tank with the chassis rotating. It is not battle capable. Also, if you start it and the wire harnessing is bad, shortages will happen and the spark will happen, the tank will burn down. And this is what Russia considers as working military tech. This is where you get the numbers 20,000 tanks. Yes, rusting on a field somewhere, unable to start and move. 20,000 dead chassis. I'm not even talking about TZMS, they're all stationed in Kamshin. All 6 are dysfunctional. They have no loaders to lift ammo crates. That's how we're preparing to go to the special military operation. No wonder the Russian morale is low. I mean, this is what they're getting. The official message from the Ministry of Defense is that we don't care about you. Take this old tech, make it work for you, and don't come back. Putin has not yet decided if he will take part personally in the G20 meeting in New Delhi. Well, I have an answer for you. He will not, because there's an international arrest warrant on his head. And people are saying, oh, it doesn't mean anything. Nobody is forcing that. Well, they are. Putin was supposed to go to South Africa to take part of the meeting of BRICS. Brasilia, Russia, China, India and South Africa. Instead, Lavrov is going to be sent, who doesn't have an arrest warrant on his head. So Putin is really afraid. He hasn't left the country once ever since the International Criminal Court put out an arrest warrant. So it feels like it works for him. I mean, he hasn't left the country. He's afraid. So it actually works. And Putin relied heavily. His entire image in Russia was built as a strongman image, riding bears and diving and driving planes and driving fast cars, going hunting. This was the propaganda imagery coming out in 2000 to 2010, 2015. Now he's afraid to go abroad because he will be arrested. There is nothing strongman-like left in him. We haven't seen a photo where he rides a horse for like 5 years now. Putin is afraid, he's paranoid, his image is crumbling, and his image is Russia's image. Putin's image is crumbling, the Russia's image is crumbling. People are not afraid of him anymore, countries are not afraid of him anymore. He's losing his grip. My friends, now I will read you a tweet that I haven't heard about. It talks about diamonds from Russia, because Russia is one of the biggest exporters of diamonds in the world. We talk about oil and gas all the time, but we never talk about diamonds. I'm sure you would love to hear about this. Russia is the world's leader in diamond mining, about 30% share, and two companies affiliated with the Russian government, Artur and Katoka, are in the top 5. Almost all production is controlled by the state, which means that huge revenues are used primarily to finance the war. In 2022, Russia received 3.8 billion USD from diamond exports. I mean, oil and gas exports were 380 billion, so 100 times more. But still, it's a big amount. Since February last year, Ukraine, Canada and the US, Australia, New Zealand and the UK have imposed sanctions against Alrosa, but not the other company. Up until now, the diamonds are largely unsanctioned coming from Russia. There are no restrictions from the EU yet, due to the resistance from the industry itself, especially in Belgium. There are also mechanisms to avoid sanctions if in a package with 100 diamonds, 98 will be Russians and 1 each from Canada and Botswana. This is already a mixed shipment. They did the same with oil. When oil sanctions started, Russia exported their oil to India. Out of 100 barrels, 2 barrels were taken from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or whatever oil exporting countries, and the 98 barrels were Russian, so it was a mixed shipment. It wasn't Russian oil. You could export it without sanctions. So this loophole has been closed, but not with diamonds. This information is important to spread because Russia has different revenue streams from raw materials, diamonds, timber, fertilizers, all of that stuff, and most heavily banned is of course gas and oil, but everything else we're also talking about billions of revenue each year, which make up the money that Russia is using to fund their military operations. Without the money, they cannot fund them. Most of the people from Russian poorer regions, Tuva Republic for example, go to fight because the salaries are promised in the military are 10 times higher than what they would get in their home region. So money is the primary aspect of getting these propaganda-filled men to go and fight. Take away the money, and I think Russia would lose half of their infantry, half of their cannon fodder. They would lose the war very fast. So I think, yeah, Ukraine fights on the front with their blood, with their lives, but we in the West, we can give them weapons, but we can also fight with this, take away the Russian revenue streams. This is why I'm spreading this information. My friends, in this video, we can see a scene where a Ukrainian soldier, a father, was rotated to have some rest for some time. He was able to come home. He decided to surprise his son. Now his son was sleeping, and when he woke up, he was very confused for a few seconds, and then he suddenly recognized his father, and you can see the rest. He's very happy, and the father is very happy. I mean, this is what they're fighting for. Family. And I feel like this scene is very familiar in the United States of America, with hundreds of thousands of troops deployed overseas. Troops who have families, their fathers, their brothers, their even grandfathers, their uncles, all of the family who is missing them, is waiting them home, and they don't know if they will come home. This Ukrainian boy didn't know if he will ever see his father again. So for the American troops, I want to say thank you for your service, because also Americans are deployed to the Baltic region. They now are building a base in Poland. So for Estonia's security, NATO and the USA is incredibly vital. So thank you for also keeping my country safe. And for the Ukrainian soldier coming home to surprise his son, I also want to say thank you on behalf of the entire European continent, because Ukrainians are fighting for the entire European continent. The ugly truth of it is, if it wouldn't be Ukraine, it would be Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland, or even Finland. So anyone in the EU who doesn't think that way, I think, is blinded. That is the ugly truth of it. Thank you, Ukraine. Putin has named his conditions to rejoin the grain deal. He is blackmailing the West. He wants some concessions in exchange for joining back to the grain deal. So he showed that they can destroy Ukrainian Odessa ports. He can destroy the crops of Ukrainian fields And now he's blackmailing. He's always blackmailing. Let's see what are his demands. I would like to emphasize that we are not against the deal itself, especially considering its importance for the global food market and for many countries around the world. And we will certainly consider the possibility of returning to it, but only on one condition. If all the previously agreed principles of Russia's participation in this deal are fully taken into account and most importantly implemented. I will remind you what we are talking about. The first is the withdrawal of Russian grain and fertilizer supplies to world markets from the sanctions. So, first deal, Russian grain and Russian fertilizers are sanctioned, and most of the countries in the world who use fertilizers are not prohibited to buy from Russia, and Russia is losing a lot of money, like a lot. And it's not only money. Russia has a lot of agricultural jobs. These jobs are, well, empty right now because they cannot export. Everybody who is making fertilizer cannot export it. Everybody who's working in agriculture. Russia produces more agricultural products than they use. So Russia is using a lot of jobs, and jobless people in Russia, they don't convert really well into society. I mean, there's gonna be alcoholism, there's gonna be drug addicts. Putin needs to fix this fast, otherwise tens of thousands, if not even 100,000 who's working in these fields, they have nothing to do. They will either go to war or drink themselves to death. That's the reality of Russia. Secondly, all obstacles for the Russian banks and financial institutions that service food and fertilizer supplies must be removed. This includes their immediate connection to the SWIFT international banking settlement system. Now, Putin is always playing the game, oh, we didn't even need SWIFT. We don't even need the Western markets of oil and gas. We don't even need to sell them. Well, now if he's blackmailing, what is behind this is the strong need to get back. Putin finally maybe realizes that SWIFT is everything in the world. If you want your country to evolve and not be a third world agricultural society, you need SWIFT, you need the banking system and the safe way to make big transactions very fast. Putin, he's stupid. He makes decisions that he doesn't even know about. He was always talking about how this doesn't hurt Russia. Now we see him begging to get back into the SWIFT system. Of course he is. It is everything. Without this, countries will slowly die away. Very slowly, a decade, 2 decades, and their output is halved. Maybe 1/3 of what it was. This is what the sanctions do, and Putin is now seeing it 1.5 years later. We do not need any promises or ideas in this regard. We need these conditions to be fulfilled. The third is the resumption of supplies to Russia of spare parts and components. Putin has always said, ever since the start of sanctions, that oh good, they're sanctioning us, great. We will make our own components, because before we couldn't, because the West was filling the gap. Now Russia can make their own. Well, we in the West, we always knew Russia cannot. Putin didn't know it. Now the reality is dawning on them. Russia is unable to produce chips, unable to produce ball bearings. Yes, ball bearings, a very physical metal steel balls that are inside this cylinder, you know, ball bearings. Russia cannot produce them, if you believe me. It takes quite a high-tech machinery with lasers to produce them, that they work properly, and Russia has imported all of them. And they now have run out. They had supplies for 1 year. I mean, you need them to build new trains, new cars. Everything that moves on wheels or moves at all and is heavy has ball bearings. Russia cannot produce them, and I see it I'm very glad to watch this video, because all the time I've heard from people also that, oh, these sanctions are not working, Russia is producing their own. This is the president of Russia giving us the notion that they cannot handle this. Agricultural machinery and fertilizer production. Next, all issues related to the insurance of Russian ships and Russian exports must be resolved. Yes, I mean, this is about the price. I'm sorry I paused this much, but I've been following the sanctions for a long time and fighting my audience a little bit, saying that they do work. And this is the proof. Because Russia has not let any information out that they work and they hurt them. But this is it. How the price ceiling works is that most of the shipping, big shipping, maritime shipping insurance companies are owned by EU countries or America. Most, like 90%. And you don't want to ship anything expensive or huge ships if you don't have insurance. And the EU and USA weaponize their insurance companies against Russia, saying that we don't give you insurance unless you don't transport Russian oil more expensive than $60 per barrel. This is how the price ceiling works. And Putin was like, we don't care, we're gonna export to India and China. And now he's crying here, begging to lift those insurance restrictions. Again, the oil and gas sanctions are working. I mean, you see me shining. I've been waiting for this for a year and a half. Logistics for food supplies must be resumed, and unimpeded supplies of fertilizers from Russia and raw materials from their production must be ensured. I mean, why does he want it? Russia is self-sufficient, as they have said for 1.5 years. What's up now? What happened? What changed? This should include the restoring of the operation of the Tolyatti-Odessa ammonia pipeline, which has been damaged due to the actions related to the agricultural sector must be unblocked. I will not go on listing all the positions and conditions for our country's participation in the grain deal. They're specified in Russia's memorandum to the United Nations, which you can read. But the main thing is that our Western colleagues need to fulfill them. Basically, lift the sanctions from Russia or we won't go back to the grain deal. Lift the sanctions from Russia or Russia will die. And finally, I have seen it all this time. These sanctions are a death blow to any country in 21st century. Putin has denied it, but suddenly somehow this information has gotten through to him. I'm very surprised. The only thing I would like to emphasize is that initially the essence and meaning of the grain deal was of an enormous humanitarian significance. The West has completely emasculated and perverted this essence, and instead of helping countries in real need, the West used the grain deal for political blackmail and made it a tool for, like, what is Putin doing right now? Blackmailing the West. Let us back into the grain deal. We will join the grain deal again if you do this. This is blackmail. And he's accusing West of the blackmail. This is how Russian politics and foreign politics work. They accuse everybody else of what they're doing themselves. This is their official doctrine in the foreign politics. And people in the West, like Germany, or for example, they didn't know how to read this. We in Estonia, we know this works like that. But the Germans actually needed to learn how to read into what Russia is saying in their foreign policies. Well, I hope now they can really translate. My friends, now it's time to read you the names of 5 Patreons, people who are supporting this channel. Some of these for years, and I do depend on these people because some of my videos do get demonetized, and then I have security to work, not to worry about funding. First name, Oscar Ramos. I've said your name, 5 times now? You keep coming back, man. Thank you very much for your unwavering support. Patrick Feng. Thank you. Dirk Uwe Vendrik. Thank you, Dirk. Mikael Siha Boat. I appreciate you. These are the 5 people. If you like my channel, the Patreon link is in the description below. Also, my friends, I would encourage you to join my Twitter account where 3 times a day you get the most important news about Russia-Ukrainian war in the most compact way possible. 5 minutes of reading and you know everything that is happening any day. Also check out my Instagram because I will be going back to Ukraine in September and I'll be posting the entire trip there. So I'll see you there. Until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini.